everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and we're back here for another live show on a Monday, which means that in about a half an hour, Manny Hill will join to come and pick the rest of the Viking schedule as we have done throughout the entire season. And I am very interested to see how many wins Manny Hill thinks this team is going to come up with. Now, this year he has ranged anywhere from 9 early on in the season to up to 13, then back down to 10 or 11. And I think he recently has settled on 12. So after a win against Arizona, where is he going to land? And I would love to hear that from you guys as well. Where you think this Vikings team ends up. Now, we've been doing this exercise week in and week out, and we've kept waiting for the loss, the loss that we don't expect, or the disappointment, and the Vikings have pulled out these games for their second straight 5-game win streak, and now they get to face off with the Atlanta Falcons and presumably Kirk Cousins. It would be truly shocking if they benched him this week. I don't see that happening, but the Atlanta Falcons and Kirk Cousins, which offers a good opportunity to go back and reevaluate and look back at the offseason that shaped the 2024 Minnesota Vikings and beyond, because it was one of the most interesting off seasons that the Vikings have ever had this last off season. When you think about how much overhaul there was, starting at the quarterback position, the Vikings entered the off season with the huge question of would they bring back Kirk Cousins? And every time Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talked, we would try to parse through, does KOC want him, but Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doesn't want him? And what are they going to offer him? Some sort of smaller short-term contract? Will there be any other team that comes in? Will they end up with a 2-year deal for Kirk and still draft a quarterback? It seemed like everything was on the table. And just today, I was thinking a lot about the day that Kirk Cousins held his press conference in the locker room following last season, where he said that it wasn't about the dollars, but what the dollars represented. And he said things like the Achilles will heal, I'm a pocket quarterback, and made more or less his appeal to teams to sign him in the offseason. And one team bit, the Atlanta Falcons. The Vikings reportedly had an offer for Cousins that was not close to what the Atlanta Falcons put down. $100 million guaranteed, somewhere in the ballpark of $45 million per year. And he ends up going and signing with the Falcons, which I think in the days after that, as they signed Sam Darnold, as they drafted JJ McCarthy, it became more and more clear that that was the Vikings plan really from day one, which when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell took over and the competitive rebuild was hatched, part of the competitive rebuild was to get the roster to a point where they could move on from Cousins, get the salary cap to a point where they would be able to spend the money that was there with him leaving the team and draft a quarterback. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah several times made reference to, and so did Kevin O'Connell, made reference to, well, this draft class was one that we knew for a couple years was going to be pretty strong. And of course, it was sort of hint, hint, wink, wink. This was the draft class that they were aiming for, because remember, when the Vikings brass came in, that was the Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, do not hitch your wagon to these guys draft that nobody really believed in those quarterbacks. And then the following season, the Vikings did reportedly look into potentially trading up, but they would have had to have gone way up to try to get CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, or Bryce Young. Richardson and Young playing a lot better these days, by the way. And there was a report about how much they were willing to give up to go get Anthony Richardson, which would have been a really fascinating shift in terms of mobility at the quarterback position. But that didn't happen. The Colts tanked for Richardson by having Jeff Saturday be their coach, and there was no way any of those teams were giving up the top quarterbacks. So that pushed the Vikings into this draft. And I think that they did have some different paths. And one of the paths would have been if Cousins would have taken essentially a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal that was really a 1-year deal to be the bridge quarterback to the next guy, which he may ultimately end up doing here in Atlanta, or at least the way that it looks now. And the Vikings chose instead to not match that offer by the Falcons, allow Kirk Cousins to move on, and buy into the idea that they would be able to draft their franchise quarterback. And as Kevin O'Connell went on his journey to find the next Vikings quarterback, it seemed that he landed on multiple guys that he would have been happy with this team, and then made one of the best decisions maybe in franchise history, which was to bring in Sam Darnold as the bridge quarterback, which matters so much to this equation, that he was the guy that they picked. If they had picked Gardner Minshew, if they had picked Jacoby Brissett, other guys that were doing the bridge thing around the league, although Russell Wilson has played pretty well, but I don't know how good he would have been in Kevin O'Connell's system that does ask for a lot of downfield passing and passing from the pocket, which Russell Wilson is more of a rollout or scramble quarterback. Still, he moves around quite a bit back there. Instead, he picked a Matthew Stafford clone in Sam Darnold, who just had not been refined and had not had good coaching and had not had good weapons. And now Sam Darnold is playing like Matthew Stafford from 2021, where there are mistakes and there are sacks and there have been interceptions and turnover worthy plays, but the high end. How about this for a stat about Sam Darnold? There are only 2 quarterbacks in the NFL who have more big time throws, which is a PFF stat, than Sam Darnold, and they are Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. That's it. So as we look at the offseason and going back in that decision, I don't think anybody had Sam Darnold in mind at all as somebody who could bring the Vikings to 10-2. When they moved on from Cousins, his name came up as a potential bridge quarterback, and it made complete sense. Like, this is a talented player, and this is someone that has been in a good system in San Francisco. And so he would make for a really good backup, as he did for Brock Purdy. Or if he has to start, if the Vikings feel that's best, which it's also funny too, if the Vikings had drafted Michael Penix instead, and there was a different draft order, and the Giants had picked JJ McCarthy and the Vikings went with Penix, then Penix would have been starting this whole year, and Sam Darnold may not have ever gotten this opportunity to show what he could be. Small world. The Atlanta Falcons take Penix. We'll never know if the Vikings would have taken Penix instead of McCarthy. I don't know on that. On draft night, it was reported that they were interested in both of them. So hard to say which one of them they would have picked. But instead, the Atlanta Falcons end up taking Michael Penix, which gives the Vikings JJ McCarthy. And when they draft McCarthy, they know that they're going to need a bridge quarterback with experience, and they end up with Sam Darnold. And here we are many months later with the Minnesota Vikings sitting at 10-2 and the Atlanta Falcons at 6-6. And I think that if you had said to me, one of these teams would be 10-2 and the other 6-6 by the time we got here, I would have said, wow, the NFC South must be really bad and Kirk's Achilles must be really good, because that was a team that was supposed to have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. If you look at the South, it's still in pretty rough shape, and they were in a position to add a quarterback with all these different weapons and be in a great spot. And I was just looking at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the newspaper down there, and their headline from yesterday, which was talking about how Kirk Cousins was shackling the offense that he was supposed to enhance, was the headline. It was Cousins shackling the offense. And I think that when we had that conversation, the one big unknown, because we knew everything about Kirk Cousins, we knew what his ceiling was, we knew what he could do, we knew what he couldn't do, which was make some of the throws we've seen from Sam Darnold or some of the scrambles from Sam Darnold. We knew the strengths, that he was a really good leader of an offense, that he was extremely accurate. His relationship with Kevin O'Connell is good. He was very experienced and in control out there. and that he had come out of his shell and he had become a better leader under Kevin O'Connell. We knew all that. But the one thing that we had no idea about was how Kirk Cousins was going to look coming off the Achilles. And I thought that that was the real linchpin to all of the arguments. So even if you had made the case, like, hey, who's going to play quarterback outside of Kirk, which I think when we saw Nick Mullins threw for 400 yards, that kind of eliminated most of that argument, because if Nick Mullins didn't throw all those crazy interceptions, they just win those games with Nick Mullins. And he was able to put up a ton of yards in this system as well. But even if you were still making that case, well, how are they going to get to the playoffs? How are they going to stay competitive? What we never had any idea was, how does a guy in his mid-30s come back from an Achilles injury and play the same kind of football? And what Kirk Cousins was arguing to the world in that press conference with us, the final day that he was in Minnesota, he was saying, well, I'm a pocket quarterback. It'll be fine. And what we've seen from him in Atlanta is that it's not fine. The juice on the football has really struggled. The play action, the bootleg, the amount that he can move in the pocket. If he wasn't a great athlete before, he was a pocket quarterback before, but now he is completely immobilized. And what I kept wondering about through that time was, how is he going to dig into the ground and throw the football? And what we've seen is that he just isn't putting a lot of juice on it. He's relying on his smarts, his anticipation. He still throws the ball accurately, but if he cannot push the ball into tight windows, it's really, really hard to win. And then you add the price tag, the risk, the fact that Atlanta went with 4 years. There was no way the Minnesota Vikings could do that. And what we ended up with was a decision to move on from Cousins that has put the Vikings in position not only this year to compete for a Super Bowl. They're not a favorite. I understand that. I hear that from people every single week. Well, that win wasn't impressive enough. It's a one-score win and so forth. But they are 10-2. And if you're at this point in the season and you're 10-2 going down the stretch, and you could get to 13 wins going into the playoffs, then you belong in the conversation. You're not the favorite, but you belong in the conversation as a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I don't think any of us would have thought, and I had them as a playoff team, but I don't think any of us would have thought that they would have been a 12 or 13 win team, because I never would have projected that Sam Darnold would be a top 10 quarterback. There were a couple of people in the comments who wanted to bet on it and said that, hey, I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback. And those people are flying high right now, because that's what he's been. That was something that I wouldn't have been able to project. I think that the most logical outcome for the season, moving on from Cousins, was that they played Darnold until the wheels came off, and then JJ McCarthy came in. Once McCarthy went out, a lot of folks were like, the season's over. There's no reason to watch. I'll check in with me in 2025 when he's ready to play. And that just shows you that with the Minnesota Vikings, you should never assume that any season is going to be what you think it's going to be, because throughout the history of this team, this type of season has popped up almost every single decade when we don't expect it. But I think the important takeaway is not really, and I, some of you, of course, you know where I stood on that decision. I was very strongly in the camp of moving on from Cousins multiple times throughout the years. Multiple contract extensions I argued against through the years, because the upside just wasn't high enough to justify the price, right? And that was always the discussion we went back to, is if you're going to pay this much, you got to get that much. And there was a lot of losing around the margins, which was not being able to sign a corner or an extra pass rusher, or not being able to scramble for a first down, or fit a ball into a tight window, or take a risk when you have to. And we've seen Darnold do a lot of those things. But what it really came down to me, was executing the plan that they laid out. And when we evaluate Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as a general manager, a lot of people focus on one particular draft that went wrong. And I get it. We love the draft. It was the first impression of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as a GM. It was his first big jump into the GM pool, and he just crashed, right? It didn't go well at all. Ed Ingram wasn't even active last week. It's pretty tough scene. Dalton Reisner, after this week, outperforming the 2022 draft pick. It's a tough scene with the 2022 draft. But to me, that is focusing so much on the trees and not the forest. The bigger picture was from start in 2022, leading up to when you make that call to move on from Kirk Cousins, to enter the great unknown of the quarterback world, to believe in what you have, which is Jefferson, Darisaw, O'Connell, and then eventually adding Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson to the mix. Also knowing that you can improve quarterback play by getting more weapons and spending draft capital on weapons like Jordan Addison, like TJ Hawkinson, and stacking up everything around your quarterback, giving him the best potential chance to succeed. Can you recreate what Kirk Cousins was able to do or more with all these people around him? And the answer has been yes, and even then some. Sam Darnold is performing at right now a higher level than almost any Kirk Cousins season. I think 2019 is probably the only one where he played as well as Sam Darnold is right now. And even then, they limited the amount that they threw with him. That was a run-first offense, and it was his lowest passing attempt total. And with Darnold, they are now in the mode, as they have not run the ball particularly great recently, of putting a lot on his shoulders. And he has been up to the challenge in these last 3 weeks. Again, I don't think any one of us would have seen it coming that Sam Darnold would be this good, but also it was a good bet to make. So the front office having this plan, the coaching staff, Kevin O'Connell, having this plan and executing it and moving on from Cousins is one of the most important things to happen to the franchise. And you can't help but think about the other outcome and what we would be talking about right now. If the shoe was on the other foot and Kirk Cousins stayed here, and think about, they've got a similar offense. They've got weapons, not quite as good as these weapons, but they're very good. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, they've got all sorts of players, and they're 6-6, and they have a negative point differential. And he just had one of those Kirk Cousins meltdown games with 4 interceptions that we saw so many times. They've had late game comebacks that have kept them alive. They've had the 500-yard game kind of out of nowhere for Kirk Cousins. I mean, they have checked off all the Kirk Cousins is your quarterback bingo boxes, except for now with this Achilles injury, it looks like he's physically fading. And that doesn't mean not take him seriously as he comes here with all those good players, and they can run the ball so well, and they're going to throw it short just like other teams have, just like Arizona did to stay on the field. So they could lose this game against Kirk Cousins. He can bounce back. We've seen him bounce back in many ways over the years when you thought it was over. But in the slightly bigger picture of this season, the Vikings are tracking as a real, true competitive team into the playoffs. And the Atlanta Falcons are the Vikings from what year? All of them? Where who believes in them? Anybody? Nobody, right? And then I still had the theory the night of the draft that they must have gotten a look at his physical, where he stood with that Achilles, and decided to draft Michael Penix because they didn't think it would necessarily hold up. And I was going back today, having a really good time reading old draft grades for Michael Penix. C, C-, D. What are they doing? Why would they ever draft this guy? Well, now they look pretty smart for drafting Michael Penix because they might need him in the coming weeks if Cousins continues to play this way. But I just keep going back to thinking about how it could have been here. It could have been the discussion that we were having right now. What do they do? And if McCarthy had gotten hurt, same sort of thing. If they had still drafted McCarthy, then even more so, like, what do? You're just out on another wasted season island with Kirk Cousins. And it would have been year 7. It would have been dead cap space. It would have been how they going to build around him. Grenard, Van Ginkel, Cashman, Gilmore, all these players. Maybe you get one of them as opposed to 4 of them. And you wouldn't have the future cap space. And you wouldn't have the future potential. I mean, at the way that Darnold's playing, it's an argument now between whether they should extend Sam Darnold or just turn things over to J.J. McCarthy. But think about that decision that you get to make. This former number 3 overall pick who's playing top 10 football, or the top 10 overall pick who you loved in training camp and in the preseason. That's spoiled for choice for the Vikings now at the quarterback position, because they moved on from Cousins, because the ownership agreed to this plan that was laid out by this leadership. And sometimes I think that when it comes to O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, that I think Vikings fans have struggled a little bit to accept how competent and good their team is run, because for so long we kept going back to, well, they're extending Cousins again, and they're signing Michael Pierce, or they're signing Bashad Breeland, and Mackenzie Alexander is coming back, and so is Shamar Stephen, and we'll see if it works this time. And we were just always kind of hammering away at these same points. You can't win this way. And to break free of those shackles, and now the fresh air that came into the organization, I think you really felt it from the beginning of the season. And it has been by far beyond best case scenario with Sam Darnold. Truly one of the best decisions that this franchise has ever made. And we'll see where it goes from here. But as you go down the stretch, and as they play the Atlanta Falcons, it's good to keep some perspective on it. As you get annoyed with the team for falling behind the very good Arizona Cardinals, hey, remember where you could be, which is the 4 interception game from Kirk Cousins, who is stumbling around back there because his leg doesn't work the same as it used to. And they're locked into that contract for 4 years, whether it's going to be him playing or I think it's $65 million on the cap next year. And it doesn't look like he could get through another year of football in the NFL. So a really, really wise decision to draw a line in the sand. And this even goes back to after 2022. He had that great season. I think most ownership, most GMs, most management would have said, get him set up, 4-year contract, top 5 money. We got to make sure we have him. We just won 13 games. It is really, really unique for a team to win 13 games and say to their quarterback, nah, we're good. We're not paying you that much. Because after Daniel Jones got paid $40 million, of course, Kirk wanted more than that. And the Vikings said, I just don't think we can do it. And that's what sent this on the path to be 10-2 heading into this game, where none of us ever thought that we would actually be. So let me get to your questions, comments. Manny's going to join in a couple of minutes here, and we'll answer questions. And he will, of course, pick the schedule as he always does. We'll start with Mike. Hopefully the Vikings will be able to pressure whoever plays quarterback for the Falcons. Last 2 weeks of ultra mobile guys has put a lot of stress on the secondary. Yeah, so this one is going to be all about, can Kirk Cousins get rid of the football quickly? They're going to blitz him. They're going to try to hit him. They're going to try to get him to move, and they're going to try to confuse him to make him stay in the pocket. How many times? I mean, nobody knows better. How many times was it pat the football, strip sack? They do have a pretty good offensive line, but what you really saw is I think the Vikings will be trying to chase the football in the secondary, because that ball is just not moving. And it wasn't moving really in 2022. I thought that there was a significant drop in the velocity of Kirk Cousins throwing in 2022, where if you go back to early in the season, there's a lot of balls that just don't have juice on them. And then last year, maybe it came back to some extent when he was winning those couple of games against San Francisco and playing well. He played a great game against San Francisco and a great game against Green Bay. but I thought that a lot of that was him kind of Drew Breesing it, like throwing with anticipation, accuracy, knowing where to throw the football. And those two defenses, Kevin O'Connell knows extremely well, and he lit them up. But that was something I went back to over and over in the offseason when we were debating this was, how is he going to throw the football hard when he didn't before? And now when you see Sam Darnold make these throws, you go, this is it right there. This is what was missing for so long was it doesn't have to be that open. It can be pretty covered, and Sam Darnold can fire it in there. And that's the reason, by the way, not to go get Jacoby Brissett. It's the reason not to sign Gardner Minshew. It's the reason that they brought Darnold in, which was another great decision, a really great decision, actually, by O'Connell and Adofo-Mensah. But that was always the big shortcoming with Cousins. How can you overcome anything? If a guy breaks into the backfield on 4th and 8, you got to check it down because you can't get the football down the field. And I think that play really stuck with them. I think the 4th and 8 play really stuck with them. That when Ezra Cleveland couldn't hold that block and Dexter Lawrence breaks through, he couldn't make the quick decision to just snap the football downfield because he doesn't have the arm strength to do it, the raw arm strength. He has to put a lot into it. So he has to roll out, but he doesn't have the speed to get away. So he has no other option than to check down. And I think that play just reverberated. Like just every time the discussion is coming up, should we extend him? I don't know, man. That 4th and 8 play. And then as you've seen some of the plays that Sam Darnold has made in the clutch, some of the throws that he's made in the clutch, those are top 5 arm talent type of throws. And you kind of see that difference of, against the Colts, they win the rep. He's rolling out and he throws the ball to Jordan Addison anyway because he can. How about the throw on the sideline to Jordan Addison? Just freakish stuff by Sam Darnold, and O'Connell talked about that today. So we've really seen the stark contrast of those things, those little things that were missing between a quarterback that can get you to 10-2 and get you over the top and not have to have it be against the easiest schedule with the bad point differential and all those asterisks, but just be a good 10-2 team as the Vikings are right now. Those things were always missing. And if Kirk Cousins had been a middle paid quarterback, if there was such a thing, or a cheaper quarterback, and they could get all the defensive players from free agency that they needed over those years, or in 2022 or in 2021, rather than patchworking all the time with Chandon Sullivan or whatever other signing they had to bring in, much respect to Jordan Hicks, but same kind of deal. Instead, they're able to go get day one guys, 3 day one guys. And you're seeing it really come together in a way that truly I did not even think it would happen this fast. I thought next year was the year that this would all come together, but we have now reached the point of saying, it happened. It happened very quickly, but in the way that they drew it up. And that's the thing too, when we talk about this team and how much you're buying into it. And I just don't feel quite the fan buy-in. Maybe it's because they don't want to love Sam Darnold. They want to love JJ McCarthy. The crowd wasn't into it very much the other day. I understand why they weren't playing super well, but I mean, when I watch Darnold play, I see so much talent and I see so many throws that couldn't have happened before. And I also see a $10 million price tag that they were able to build this excellently talented team around him. And you go, this was it. This was what they aimed for. And that last offseason changed everything for this organization. So let's get Mr. Manny Hill in here. Manny, I got to tell you, my friend, what a time to be alive with the Vikings being 10-2 and the Falcons 6-6. It just couldn't have lined up any more perfectly for the Vikings to say we made the right decision than what happened last week. A tremendous game-winning drive with Superman throws from Sam Darnold following a great performance in Chicago, juxtaposed with Kirk Cousins not being able to throw the football anymore in Atlanta. And that doesn't mean I think the Vikings will just steamroll, and we'll get to your picks for the rest of the season, but it is really shining a big giant floodlight on how smartly the Vikings front office handled the entire quarterback situation from the time they got here to after 2022 not extending Kirk Cousins to this last offseason saying, hey, we love you. Thanks for the memories. 2022 was great. Sorry about your Achilles, but we can't be that team for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just really represents all of the things that I think people like you and I were arguing with some fans about when it came to Kirk Cousins and why his tenure here was so complicated and why it was so sort of divisive, because it wasn't that Kirk wasn't good in the 6 years that he was here, but because of the contract and because of where he we both kind of hate quarterback rankings, but where he sort of stood in the quarterback pecking order of the league, that, he was getting paid like a top 5 quarterback, but he wasn't really one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the league. And because of his contract, it just made things so much more challenging for them to really build a contending team around him. You can win games with Kirk Cousins, but as you have said many times for the last 6, 7 years, the circumstances have to be really perfect for him to be successful at a high level. And when you take that money off of the books and you insert Sam Darnold at $10 million, like you were saying, it gives you the cap space to be able to go and get a Jonathan Grenard. My God, what a signing that has turned out to be. It gives you cap space to get an Andrew Van Ginkel. How good has he been this year? Stephon Gilmore, to be able to have some cap space near the end of training camp to, when you realize we need another corner, we need some more depth at corner. Let's go get the best guy on the market and give him, what is he making 10 million, I think, this year? You know what I mean? Like, the Vikings they just weren't able to make moves and signings like that really for the entire time that Kirk Cousins was here. And it just made things so much more challenging. That's why they were constantly a 500 team. And now when you see that you're able to go out and make those moves because you have more cap space, because your overall quarterback room is cheap, we're seeing the results. They're 10-2, and it's largely because of how Sam Darnold has played, but it's also because of the other guys that they went and got in free agency this year and how they've played as well has really contributed to their success.
There's another part of the dynamic too with Cousins, and you're absolutely right about Jonathan Grenard. Him and maybe you get him, and that's it though. And you don't get Cashman, you don't get Van Ginkel, you definitely don't get the last second signing of Gilmore for sure. But another part of it was they always, with Kirk Cousins, had to live in panic mode. And it wasn't until 2022 to 2023, which I think is where Kwesi Adofo-Mensah deserves the most credit. Because from 2022 to 2023, they finally stopped being in panic mode. And they said, all right, Adam Thielen, who made a great catch for Carolina the other day, if you didn't see it, one-handed grab. It was amazing. Yes. But Adam Thielen, you don't really fit our timeline. So goodbye. Dalvin Cook, you don't fit our timeline. Goodbye. Dalvin Tomlinson, we love you. You're a great player, but you're not quite worth that. And you don't really fit our timeline. And they started to think in terms of future. And it wasn't just through draft picks, which they tried to trade down, get more draft picks and think for the future. That blew up in their face. But even someone like TJ Hawkinson, thinking for the future of surrounding the quarterback. How are you going to do it? Find the replacement for Thielen, who's 21 years old. Find that tight end who's a top 5 tight end in the league at catching the football and is basically a number 3 wide receiver, just happens to be big and hairy, but he is really, really good in terms of deep routes, separation, all those things, getting guys who can win one-on-one for your future quarterback, thinking about future cap space. So not, hey, let's just squeeze out. Let's wring that towel of the cap space. Hey, Rob Brzezinski, can we just restructure one more? Wring that thing out. And the other thing too is if they would have an injury or the kicker would stumble, then it was, you got to cut him. Or you have to go trade for Chris Herndon, or you have to make panicked signings if your draft pick corners aren't working out the way you expected to. There was just so much panic. And when they decided not to extend him after 2022, that lifted from the organization and they were able to think long term. And I think a long term viewpoint was, hey, let's look a year down the road. Hey, wait a minute. There's 6 projected first round quarterbacks. I remember Mel Kiper saying that there were 6 or 7 projected first rounders, and people were like, Mel, are you on crack? Like, there's no way there's going to be that many. But he was right. There was 6 first rounders. And so they looked down the road finally to the future and what they were going to do in their time horizon or window or whatever you want to call it. And that decision has sent them off on this path where, Manny, I mean, they're great this year. They're not as good as 2 or 3 other teams. I get that, but they're a really, really good football team this year, right in the mix with everybody else. And we still don't feel like they're even as good as they could be down the road with the cap space that they have. And so now you're sitting here going like, wait a minute, like this happened faster than you thought. And so now the biggest problem that might be on their hands is if Sam Darnold has a top 7 season of all quarterbacks in the NFL, which he is right there right now, like now do we pay this other really super talented quarterback? That's the biggest problem they're facing, not how do we wring every dollar out of that salary cap to work around a quarterback who just isn't good enough to take you there.
It provides just the overall flexibility that they have to sort of choose a path. Like you said, with Sam Darnold, like, okay, if they go all the way to the NFC Championship game, or let's say they go all the way to the Super Bowl and Sam Darnold's playing really well, yeah, it's a little bit of a problem because they have to make a decision now on Sam Darnold, what they want to do with him. But it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a good problem to have, because if you do decide to move on from Sam Darnold, well, you have JJ McCarthy now that you can kind of turn the page to, and let's see how this turns out with this young quarterback that we drafted last year. You know what I mean? That's the kind of the mentality that they can have. And I don't think that there's really a way that they could go wrong with it. The only way I could see this situation, this sort of scenario with Darnold and McCarthy in the future and everything sort of going wrong or going haywire, is if they pay Sam Darnold and then he just regresses back to Jets or Panthers, or even like Panthers Sam Darnold. Even if he's, he played well at times in Carolina, but like if you're paying him $45 million a year and he's playing like he did in Carolina, like that's not going to be good enough. You're going to be 500 team, and then we're back to kind of where we were with Kirk Cousins at that point. But I don't get the sense that what we're seeing from Sam this year is a fluke. I don't think that this is something like a one-off type of thing, because you talked about the physical tools, the talent. He's 27 years old. He's kind of starting to enter like the prime of his career. This is like the peak of his career over these next, maybe handful of years or so. This is kind of the sweet spot for him, and this is an opportunity for him to really kind of continue to build on what he's been able to experience now. Last year with San Francisco, being in that locker room, being on a team that goes to the Super Bowl, and then this year starting a full season with Kevin O'Connell, a guy that's going to really, push him and uplift him and show confidence in him, belief in him, and just, an overall organization that, this, in terms of just like operation and, people wanting to play for this team, like this is the overall culture that this team has. That's good. It's big. It's big for somebody like Sam Darnold as well. So it's an interesting dilemma for them to be in, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad one. And I think KOC and Kwesi deserve a ton of credit for that. And it goes back to that decision to move on from the guys that they needed to move on from over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, when you compare dilemmas, oh no, we have 2 quarterbacks who could play and we could build around and can win a lot of games. And Sam Darnold has played at a level that is deserving of 10 wins. When you look at where he ranks by, whether it's traditional stats or the PFF grades or whatever you want to look at, I mean, he's up there with the other big arm quarterbacks. And that's really the difference between Darnold and any other conversation we've had in the past. like this. Like hey, should they stick with Case Keenum? He has some magic to him. But Case Keenum was 6 foot tall and had no real arm and just had a magical season. And like, all credit to him. He made the throws and he made the plays, but it took kind of a miracle for that to happen. He wasn't all that accurate and he couldn't fit it into tight windows, and he kind of just threw it up and somebody caught it for a whole season. And they really couldn't throw the ball a lot with him. They ran a lot. They ran a lot of play action. They ran a lot of screens. They kind of cartooned it up to make sure that he could run that offense as you do with backups. This is a fully different conversation with someone who was drafted 3rd overall and is a really giant dude. Like, he's not 6'6", but width-wise, core-wise, strength-wise, he's built like a linebacker. He throws the ball so hard. The other players, the coaches, they're like, can you believe these throws? Can you believe the velocity? I was talking to a player the other day who's like, we just watched the back on tape and like rewind and watch again, rewind. We're just like, how did he do it? But that's why he was picked. It was all the other stuff that needed to be refined and then the situation around him. But when you talk about the other part of it too is, okay, are they going to Kirk this thing again with Darnold if they pay him? And that I don't think is the case, because not every person who gets paid is a total disaster immediately after.
Right.
There is a path to still make this work with the plan that they laid out. It's just a little different. So this year they're paying $40 million to the quarterback position. 28 is going to the other team's quarterback this week of dead cap money. How fun that is. That's why you sign him, right, Atlanta? So you can have dead cap for the rest of your existence as a franchise. But
How's
anyway,
that going?
Yeah, they're going to be paying a lot of Denver's paying Russell Wilson to have 10 wins or whatever in Pittsburgh too. Strange world we have here. But the point is that Darnold, well, one, has the raw talent. So that's just different on its face right there. You need less, I think, for someone who can throw the ball that hard, but you've already got all those foundational pieces around him. It's not like you have to go get a left tackle. It's not like you have to go get wide receiver 1 or 2 or a tight end. Everything is set up. The offensive line is blocking really well for him. It's not like you have to get him a new coach where he's already got his coach in place. So there's a predictability. There's also, if you sign him to a short-term deal and you develop McCarthy for another year, oh no, he'll be 23. What will we ever do then? Still younger than Bo Nix and Michael Penix in 2 years. And you can also sign contracts and push them out, because what you want to start doing in a Super Bowl window, when you start winning double-digit games, that's when you start playing with the cap. And yeah, 5 years from now, that might be a problem for you. But if you're in this time now, even if you didn't think you were going to arrive here quite yet, then you do everything you can. So you can go out and you can get the defensive tackle for next year who could get in the backfield, and you make his first year salary cap hit lower. And then into the future, it will rise when you assume that you will either move on from Darnold or he'll compete for a Super Bowl. And then you got to give him the big extension and then you deal with it then. Right. But you can extend this thing out for another year, which seems like the ballpark that they're kind of approaching if he continues to play this way. And what I just don't see here, Manny, I just don't see where the regression is. I mean, he'll have a bad game. He'll have another bad game for sure. Every quarterback does. But I don't see, there's no gimmickiness to this. It doesn't feel random that a guy with this arm and this size can throw these footballs and play this confidently under Kevin O'Connell. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but like, it's not a, it's not like they sort of Jimmy rigged the offense just so he could get some good numbers like Kyle Shanahan would do with Jimmy Garoppolo or something. Like, this feels like Sam Darnold's out there just making plays.
You know what has really impressed me about him this year too is just aside from the physical tools, which are, like, to your point, are just outrageous, the arm strength and the ability to the athleticism to run and escape out of the pocket when he's under duress. But like, up here is, I think, is legit too. Like, the mental toughness that this guy has shown this year in situations where things kind of get out of control, where they have a big lead in Green Bay and the Packers come back and make it a game again, and they need a drive to just go down and execute and get a field goal. They did that. You know what I mean? Chicago, when the 11-point lead evaporated in 22 seconds, the defense gets a stop in overtime. And then what does Darnold do when he gets the ball in overtime? He just marches right down the field, hits TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison for a couple big plays. They kick the field goal and they win. And then the fact that they lost that 11-point lead doesn't really matter much because you found a way to win that game. Yesterday, oh my God, just that drive to the essentially the game-winning drive, the throws that he made, the fourth and 6 to Jefferson. I mean, that's big boy execution stuff. And the fact that he's doing it in a very calm demeanor and not panicking and not, because I mean, Kirk, and I hate to keep making like the Kirk comparison, but like, Kirk had game-winning drives as well, especially in 2022. He had a lot of those game-winning drives, but it always seemed sort of like crazy and chaotic. And, Kirk's running and he's waving his hands and he's doing all this other stuff. And oh my God, he hits KJ Osborne for a big touchdown and the Vikings win the game. You know what I mean? And it's like, that was good. That was great. But like, it just, there's something about Sam's demeanor that just seems a little bit different, to where there's just a little bit more like he's under control and he knows exactly what to do in those type of situations, which is crazy because sometimes you see him earlier in games, he'll make some throws where he's trying to force it to Justin Jefferson. You're like, Sam, what are you doing? Don't do that. This guy, Addison crossing pattern right here, who's wide open. Don't do that. But it seems like when the situation gets more dire, for whatever reason, I can't explain it. For whatever reason, he seems to just sort of calm down and he just goes out and he makes the throws that he needs to make. And it just works. And to your point, I don't think this is a fluke. I think this is what he has kind of become under, let's not overstate or let's not understate the year that he spent in San Francisco, just sitting behind Brock Purdy, again, on that team that has a deep run all the way to the Super Bowl. It's more practice. It's more time with his teammates, more, time in an environment that's about competence and winning and execution and getting things done. And then he comes here and a lot of the same sort of things. So I think this is legit. And, I don't know how the season is going to finish and what they decide to do with him, but it's going to be fascinating to find out. And I think whether it's here next year or somewhere else, he's going to get a bag and he deserves it. He's earned it.
Let's continue this conversation and then we'll pick the schedule shortly, but I want to get to some people's comments here. Hunter says Darnold's been clutch, no other way to put it. And that surprised me. So in 2021, when the Vikings faced him and his team dropped like 13 passes in a single game, and then he was down 8 and came back and scored a touchdown and then converted the 2-point conversion. At that moment, I was like, oh, okay, wow. And I know that defense wasn't all that good, but I mean, he flashed some serious talent there. And you saw him in Carolina in 2022 win some games. It's not like it was never there. He's had game-winning drives. He's had some fourth quarter comebacks. It's just that his teams were really bad and he would get behind. And I remember looking in the offseason at all of the numbers when he wasn't playing from down 2 scores, when he wasn't trying to desperately get his team back in games. And he played like a pretty good quarterback. And I remember looking at when he was given support, when he threw to DJ Moore, what did it look like? When he ran play action, what did it look like? And it all looked like an NFL starting quarterback. It was when he had to do everything else that it didn't look that way because he didn't have the support. He didn't have the coaching. He didn't have the wide receivers. Another part of it too is you mentioned the clutchness. That's certainly been impressive that he never seems to get shaken. I would say also that the way he's handled this whole thing, they bring him in at $10 million. He knows they're going to draft a quarterback. They draft a quarterback. He and JJ McCarthy go on a golf trip with the other quarterbacks right away. Like that's the way he handles it. And connects with his teammates really well, has a tremendous training camp. Everyone wants to see McCarthy. He knows that. There's no way he missed it. every single day is, when's McCarthy going to get first team reps? Is McCarthy going to get first team reps? I'd love to see some first team reps for McCarthy. No, okay, Sam, it's great that you're out, even with the fans out there at TCO Performance Center. Okay, that was a good Justin Jefferson catch, but this check down by JJ McCarthy, yeah, like that was how it was, because nobody thought that he was going to be the guy. And you never saw him take any sort of attitude like that, or, you guys are doubting me or any nonsense. It was not seemingly in his head. They played the Jets this year. He had nothing to say about it, just went and played the Jets, won the game, came back home. The way that he has just managed this entire thing. And then he has the horse bleep game against Jacksonville. We knew it was going to happen at some point. And the big thing was, where does he go from here? 3 straight games where he's either great against Chicago, or at least when they needed him most, good enough to go win the game against Arizona. Jason says Sam does not pass the eye test. He looks lost for 1 or 2 quarters every game. Move on after this year. Stick to the original plan. I just don't see that. I think when I think about an eye test, I mean, first of all, like, we watch every single Vikings game so closely, every single play under a microscope. Go watch a Bengals game under a microscope. And like, you're going to see times where even the great quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, Mahomes this year, it's not always this perfectly smooth, flawless operation for every single quarter. That's why we use the accumulation of the statistics to tell the story, which is that he's been a top 10 quarterback. But this is the offense too. The offense is like that. It's always going to be like that, where if they're hunting big plays early and they're not there, it's going to slow down. Also, his running back fumbled, like right in, completes a pass, fumbles the ball. I thought that kind of threw them for a loop. But Chicago, that was 5 good quarters. That was more than that. Tennessee, that was 4 good quarters. Indianapolis, there's 2 mistakes mixed in, but otherwise 4 good quarters of football. I don't know. Yeah, I guess we could criticize him for how he played against Green Bay when they were up by 28 points or whatever. I don't know exactly. When I think eye test, Manny, I think arm talent, leadership, command of the offense, making plays,
and winning,
all that, and winning.
Yes. My God, they're 10-2.
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about here? Yep. Like, they are winning football games, and it's not. This is not, he's playing. Sam Darnold is not Trent Dilfering this thing. Okay. This is not like the Vikings defense has been good this year. For the most part, it's been very good, but this is not like the 2000 Ravens and Trent Dilfer is getting away with throwing for 120 yards and maybe a touchdown, and the Ravens are winning 13-9. Like, Sam Darnold is out there making plays when the team is up big and the lead, shrinks down, or the other team comes back and ties it up, and you need him to make a play. You need him to make a throw. I mean, do people now realize, and again, I'm trying not to overstate this. Do people not realize how freaking cold-blooded that 4th down conversion on that last drive was? Like, you don't get that done, you don't execute that, game's over. It's over. You've lost. And for him to just calmly go and execute that play and then continue to move them down and get the touchdown to Aaron Jones, like, we've seen him do that multiple times now, that I don't know what eye test other people are looking at. When you've seen that happen enough, and this team is 10-2, and they've been finding ways to win games the way they have this year, I'm seeing a different eye test, I guess, maybe.
So Michael says, and this one kind of made me laugh a little, JJ was out playing Darnold at times during training camp. Even though JJ should be completely healed by January, I would still have him as the backup next year if Darnold wants to stay here. So the second part I agree with, but I mean, unless you were at every single training camp practice, like I was, but he didn't take any first team reps in the whole offseason. He was reaching the point where he was going to, but he was not out playing Sam Darnold in training camp. Like, Sam Darnold had a great training camp, and Sam Darnold was going to start week 1. And had Darnold started week 1, they were going to Cleveland with JJ having a chance to really show his stuff and make it interesting for Kevin O'Connell. but having not taken any first team reps through the entire spring or summer, it was going to be Darnold. And if they started 5-0, it would still be Darnold. And the only time McCarthy's name would have come up is after the Jacksonville game, but it would still be Darnold. So that was never going to be the case. It's just that I don't know if that, like, there became some sort of training camp mythology about JJ McCarthy after he got hurt, but he was doing great. I mean, I'm not downplaying that McCarthy was doing great, but you can't say he was outplaying him when he wasn't taking any first team reps. Like Sam Darnold, that's the thing about Darnold, is that he's never not been good. Like from the time he got here, he was good in mini camp. He was good in training camp. The only time he struggled was in those joint practices, which were against one of the best defenses in the league. But then, and Addison got hurt as well in those practices, but he's never not been good for this team. And what I was going to say is, you don't have to pick a side when it comes to JJ McCarthy and Sam Darnold. They both play for your team. You don't have to do this. Like, you don't have to root for Darnold to fail so you can have McCarthy because he's the guy that you wanted. But sometimes it feels like that's what we have a little bit of here. And I'll tell you a tale, Manny, that you can appreciate, and I don't know how much of our audience can. Once upon a time, I learned about the quarterback controversy in Buffalo with Rob Johnson and Doug Flutie. And let me tell you, got nasty. It broke up households. People were team Rob Johnson. He's more talented. Flutie is just a fluke. And the owner wanted Rob Johnson because they traded a first round pick for him. And yet the coach Wade Phillips wanted Doug Flutie because he was winning games. And it really split the fan base. And you just don't have to do that. And that was probably like that in San Francisco with Steve Young and Joe Montana. And when's Steve Young going to play? And they would bench Montana and put Young in and all those things. It's like, they both play for your team. And if Sam Darnold plays well enough to earn a franchise tag or short-term extension or something, that means he played super good. That means he played so well that he moved your franchise off their entire plan. That's really high bar. That means he played freaking incredible. And if he doesn't, you have this quarterback that your head coach called the future of the franchise and was thrilled about during training camp, where he was very good. I'm just saying he wasn't winning the competition when he got hurt. He was maybe going to get some first team reps. But the point just being, like, your team went from screwed at quarterback with an old, mid, expensive guy who couldn't make a play on 4th and 8 to now being like, boy, I don't know if I like this rocket arm dude who was the 3rd overall pick or the 10th overall pick who looked awesome. Man, like, it's a good position to be in.
Yes, it's a good
problem to have.
It's a great problem to have. And I don't really think that there's a wrong path for them to go with this, because if they do decide to move on from Sam, and if Sam wants to go elsewhere and get a huge bag, and great for him, then you have JJ McCarthy as your option for 2025, and you're going to have all the cap space that you can go out and spend and bring in players to try and bolster this roster even more. But if you have a chance to bring Sam back, if Sam continues to play well and you go on a deep playoff run and he plays great in that playoff run and he wants to come back, you can give him like a Baker Mayfield type of deal, and you can still have JJ McCarthy kind of in your back pocket. And JJ McCarthy wouldn't be the first quarterback to sit for a couple of years before he got his opportunity to start. I mean, we saw that with Aaron Rodgers and turned out okay. We saw that with Aaron Rodgers' successor, and so far it looks like it's turning out okay. So, and you brought up the Joe Montana, Steve Young situation. Steve Young was backing up Joe Montana for what, 4 or 5 years before he got his opportunity to start at like 30 years old. Turned out okay for them still. So you don't have to force feed the issue of, you don't have to square peg round hole this JJ McCarthy situation. You have a little bit of time to let that simmer if you need to. But if the Sam option becomes, he goes elsewhere, then you have JJ and you're not in a panic mode. You're not feeling like you got to spend your first round pick in 2025, which might be, depending on how far you go, might be like the 28th pick in the draft. You don't have to worry about, oh, Sam just left in free agency. We don't have a quarterback. We got to draft somebody, and we're not high enough to draft him. So now we need to use more capital to trade up and take a guy. You know what I mean? You already have that guy. So it's not a terrible problem to be in. And you got to credit the GM and the head coach also for kind of instilling this culture as well. They're sitting in a good spot right now. I don't really see how anybody can have any real complaints.
Well, and they've done what Philadelphia and San Francisco have done, which is create an environment where quarterbacks can succeed. I mean, Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy are really good quarterbacks. I know Purdy's struggling, but my gosh, look at that team. It's just a mess right now with injuries and McCaffrey going out, just like crushing the other night. But he's still a good quarterback. He took them to the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, proven this year that he's still a good quarterback. The environment doesn't hurt, where they've put all the skill players around him and the good coaching around those guys. And it just ups your odds of being able to succeed. And that's what, like, Russell Wilson goes to Pittsburgh and he's succeeding because they got weapons and they got good coaching and a running game. And like, there you go. You have a good environment and a good franchise, and it works. So I think there would be a lot of confidence in going to JJ McCarthy, but what Mel Kill here says, JJ McCarthy is nearly a finished product. Vision check, arm strength check, clutch check, only needed footwork help and got it. He got hurt. Otherwise he would have been playing. That last part's not true at all. No, he would not have been playing if Sam Darnold started 5-0 and was 10-2. He would not have come off the bench. I promise you that. But when it comes to that other stuff, I think you're right that he has good vision and he has really good arm strength. And I think that he has great confidence and leadership and all the reasons that they drafted him. But finished product, this is the trouble. No way. Not anywhere close to a finished product. After what? One preseason game? No. It took Sam Darnold how long to be a finished product? We're not even sure if he is a finished product. No, JJ McCarthy is nowhere close to that. And there is the potential issue with, if you go to the NFC Championship with Sam Darnold, and then you're going to turn to someone who is not a finished product, who hasn't played any football, how is that going to go? How is that going to go in the locker room? How is that going to go for your team? And if he's not phenomenal right away, if he doesn't go 5-0 right out of the gate, well, then how does that feel? Where are we at then? So if you go so far with Sam Darnold, it's going to be to the point where you're like, this is the quarterback level of play that we were looking for the whole time. We just found it in a different guy than we expected to, kind of like how Brock Purdy was that guy and not Trey Lance. You go, well, you invested all that in one guy. It turned out to be the other guy, but oh well. JJ McCarthy would be closer to a finished product if he waited another year to play, as opposed to this year, because he's not on the field. He's not working with the footwork and anything else. I mean, he is going to be still quite a ways away from being a finished product.
He's 21.
Yeah.
He's 21 years old.
I don't even know when he turns 22.
I think his birthday is in January. So he'll be 20. Wow. He'll be 22 next month.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's 21 years old. He's not even remotely close to being a finished product. And that's okay. That's okay.
Of course it's okay.
Doesn't mean you have to rush him out there either.
But it might mean that they need to bring back Sam Darnold if they're like right there. That Slowpoke says, what happens if they hoist the Lombardi trophy? Then what do you do with Sam? You build a statue of him. Yeah. I don't know. I don't care what they do at that point. You can do whatever you want.
Sign him to an extension. You sign him to an extension because that's your guy. I mean, if you win a Super Bowl, and I did, there are exceptions to this rule. I mean, the Eagles, when they won with Nick Foles, they didn't really like give him a statue or sign him to this big mega contract or anything. They kept him around and he ended up helping them win a playoff game the next season as well. But for the most part, I think that if you win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold with the way he has played this year and at his current age at, 27 years old, where he's still got a lot of really good football, in theory in front of him, you sign him to a long-term deal, and that's your guy, and then you just kind of figure it out with JJ McCarthy. Maybe if Sam continues to play really well over the next couple of years after that, you just keep rolling with him, and then maybe somebody you can trade JJ McCarthy and maybe get a first round pick for him. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing either.
Kerpluppy says, if Sam resigns, are there examples of quarterbacks like him earning a franchise contract extension in a resurrection year who re-signed and continued to be a top 10 quarterback? The thing about the Sam Darnold situation is that it is, I don't want to say completely without precedent, but it kind of is. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think right on the fly. Are there other top 5 quarterbacks in the draft who went somewhere else and then became a franchise quarterback and played like this? Just period. That ever had a good year? It never really happens. I mean, you can say Baker, who's continued to play great, by the way, but Baker was good in Cleveland and then they just screwed it up. But he had them in the playoffs. Geno Smith was a second round draft pick who's good, but not on the talent level, raw talent of Sam Darnold. There's just not examples of this happening. What, Vinny Testaverde? I mean, there really isn't. So if you're talking about examples, first of all, I don't think history really projects what's going to happen with this guy right here, right now. But my thing is, as far as his continued play, what's changing? Who's leaving? Like, normally what happens would be, okay, the guy has an outlier year where everything goes his way. I don't think that's been the case. I don't think that he's just thrown up balloons into the sky and had them fall in receivers' hands. I don't think they've played a hard schedule at times. Like, Arizona's good, Green Bay's good, San Francisco was tough when they played them. Houston's pretty good. It's not like they had some silly everything fell their way season. They've turned the ball over, they fumbled, they gave up an onside kick. Like, they've had things go wrong and he has fought through them. So I just don't know. I can't think of another quarterback who has been like this, of his talent level, that found his spot somewhere else. And he's 27. That's the other part of this thing too. It's not like it's even Rich Gannon, who I talked to before the season about Sam Darnold. He loves Sam Darnold, by the way. And he bought into the Sam Darnold idea. He actually talked to KOC about Sam Darnold. But Rich Gannon showed up many years later. It's not even like that. I don't know. I mean, you're the history wizard on this show. You tell me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, as you were talking, I was trying to think of another situation that was similar to this, and I can't really think of one where it's
If
a guy
somebody's
that
got
was,
one,
yeah. I mean, we're talking about
Jim
a guy that
Plunkett,
was, yeah, maybe, I guess,
sort of.
maybe Jim Plunkett,
He was a
kind of, yeah,
top draft pick, yeah, who
yeah,
won a
it was,
Super Bowl with the Raiders.
yeah, won a couple Super Bowls actually with them. Yeah, I don't know. Plunkett might be the closest thing that I can think of. That might be the closest thing to being similar to this.
Yeah.
I can't think of another guy.
And I think Plunkett, after he won the Super Bowl, he still got benched, right? If I'm remembering my history. So maybe that will be exactly the same. I don't know.
Yeah, so they beat the Eagles in Super Bowl 15 in the Superdome, and then I think it was like 3 years later they beat Washington. It was like their second year in LA, the Raiders, and then they blew out the Washington football team down in Tampa. And he
Right.
was the quarterback. That was the Marcus Allen crazy Super Bowl. But yeah, Plunkett was quarterback of both of those teams. But even I think at that point, he had gotten, I think, into his 30s. And, like this, like Sam's 27. Like you said, he's 27 years old. Like, this is a guy that we might not even be seeing the best football from him yet. You know what I mean? And he's played very well this year. This might not even be the best version of Sam Darnold. That might still be, yet to come. So I don't
Well,
know.
and
It's interesting.
you just never really know when life is going to throw you a curveball. I mean, let's say they franchise tag Sam Darnold and then he gets hurt the next year and JJ McCarthy ends up playing, like, that could happen. I don't know. Jimmy Garoppolo ended up playing after Trey Lance went bust and then he gets hurt and they bring in Brock Purdy and then he's the guy. I mean, you never really know. There's so many stories of quarterbacks who you didn't expect to be this good. We're talking about top draft picks, but the Brady, the Kurt Warner, and then, the Brock Purdy, sometimes this just happens that somebody finds the right spot and then it clicks. And I think that's what we've seen from him. But I just want to be clear where I stand on this, which is I'm still in the camp of let's just see what happens. We'll know when we know about what they're going to do. And I also will not be joining Team Darnold or Team McCarthy, because I did watch every training camp practice and I was impressed like crazy with McCarthy. His development in a short period of time was as much as any player I've ever seen. I think both of your quarterbacks are extremely good and have a chance, both of them, to lead the team somewhere. It's just that if you get to a spot where Darnold is taking you deep into the playoffs and your offense is going to stay exactly the same, it's just going to be really hard to tell everybody you're going to somebody else. That I think has to be addressed. Although I was talking with Kevin Seifert about it, and he thinks that if they won the Super Bowl, they'd still go to McCarthy. And my take on that is who cares? If they win the Super Bowl, I'll cover the Super Bowl, shut down Purple Insider, and take a long vacation after I collect all of the Diet Dr. Pepper will finally sponsor me for the Super Bowl. And after I collect that check, then we'll shut it down, because it'll never get better than that. And somebody else can do it. So, okay. Our goal was to pick the schedule, and we just got off onto this fun discussion. And that's the main thing too, is we started this conversation about, can you imagine if they brought back Kirk? And just how different this would be, how different the vibes would be, the feeling, how different the record would be, and all those things. The conversation. We are having a conversation about will they go from this really awesome top 10 quarterback this year to the top draft pick who convinced KOC he was the future? What will they do? Think about our discussions in an alternate universe where they extend Kirk. Holy cow.
It's what made this season so much fun. It's why I keep saying it every week. I'm going to keep saying it every week. It's why this season has been the most fun watching this team since 2017, because it's just something fresh and new, and you don't really know how it's going to finish, and that's what makes it really exciting and intriguing and fun. So I love it. I love it. I'm having a blast.
Okay, let's pick the schedule. Luckily, it's a shorter schedule than it used to be. This bit used to take a really long time. So let me get some music going here for us, and we will get into how many wins you think the Vikings end up with. Oh, Manny, how about that? Were there any iterations that got to 10-2? I don't think that there were.
I think there might have been one. Yeah, I think there was one a couple of weeks ago. I think I had them beating Arizona and then losing to Atlanta maybe a couple of weeks ago.
You were close on this one. You thought they would kind of hit a wall against Arizona. You were very
close. I just thought that I thought Arizona, with Kyler Murray kind of being the dynamic running quarterback, maybe would present some problems for them on defense, and he kind of did. And Jonathan Gannon being kind of a defensive mind can kind of, they were doing a lot of some of their blitz packages and some of the stuff very Brian Flores where they were just, being very aggressive with blitz packages and everything. And that was kind of a problem for the Vikings yesterday. But they get the win, and they're 10-2, which is great. And you know what? After what I saw from the Atlanta Falcons yesterday, the Vikings are going to be 11-2 on when Sunday is over. That team is, I'm not even sure they're going to make the playoffs with the way things are going for them right now. Kirk was awful, and you got to wonder if he's even going to make it to the end of the season before Raheem Morris just says, all right, that's enough. Let's go to Michael Penix. I got to think Kirk will get a shot to start this coming Sunday. It's his homecoming. It's a big game. But I don't think it's going to go very well, because Kirk Cousins is not a dynamic mobile quarterback that runs around and makes things difficult for a defense. And Brian Flores is going to have a field day, And the Vikings, I think, are going to take care of the Atlanta Falcons. And I don't really think it's going to be particularly close.
So here's the counterpoint.
Okay.
Every time we think we've got the NFL solved, it says, aha! No,
Not
you
so fast.
don't. Roger Goodell's script may have the Falcons surprising us here. It's only because the Vikings needed 80 plays on defense to beat the Cardinals that they are so worn down over these last 2 weeks that's where I wonder about chasing around these weapons. And Kirk is going to get rid of the ball fast because he's not going to want to face these blitzes from Brian Flores. And where they have had some struggles is when the opposing quarterback gets the ball out quickly. They were able to stay on the field. Kyler Murray was doing it. Those short passes to McBride, the yards after catch. They did run a little bit with James Conner, but not into the end zone, but they ran in the middle of the field. They've got two great running backs. They have a good offensive line. I don't want to go there. I just don't like the NFL just has this way of you think a team is toast, you think they're done, and then all of a sudden they surprise you. But you're the schedule picker. So 11-2. 11-2 it is. Bears coming to US Bank Stadium with a new head football coach. And my friend Kaylin Kaler had to did you see what she did? ESPN, Kaylin Kaler?
I did not.
What she did online? Oh, she took gasoline, poured it all around, lit a match, threw it up, and walked away. She said the Bears should trade for Kevin O'Connell.
Hey, you know what? I mean, it's not going to happen, but I'm not mad at that.
I don't blame. Yeah, they should trade for Vince Lombardi too.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that thought.
Sorry, Bill Walsh might not be available. They're going to have to get maybe Marv Levy and Mike Holmgren on the coaching staff. No, but what would you trade KOC for? Assuming it can't be Caleb Williams, like what would you trade the head coach of this team for? I would trade him for one guy on his couch who's a better play caller. Come on, it had to be said.
2 first-round picks and a player.
That's it.
At least.
I was thinking 3. I was thinking 3 firsts.
Yeah, probably 3 first.
Players got to be really good.
Yeah. It's like 3 firsts and like DJ Moore.
Montez Sweat. It's not enough. It's not enough because if you get Mike Tomlin, Sean McVay, one of these guys who can just be great for many, many years as your head coach,
you can't put a price on it.
You really can't.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't trade him away for 5 firsts. Maybe for 5 firsts. So, but really, like what he's been able to do. So anyway, they beat the Bears. Who's coaching them?
I think it is Thomas Brown. I think it's Thomas Brown. Yeah. How about his sort of story arc over the last couple of weeks? It's like, oh, you're, just an assistant, and then you get promoted to offensive coordinator, and then like within a week, you're also now interim head coach. What a run for him the last couple of weeks.
Dick LeBeau was not available? I'm just thinking of great coaches. Like what? They couldn't get Bill Cowher? They think they're gonna trade for KOC? Okay, anyway. Sorry. Are they beating the Bears?
I'm fascinated to see how the Bears play this first game post Matt Eberflus coming this weekend. And who do they have this week? Who do the Bears have this week?
I do not know.
They should have been more prepared for this. I'm just fascinated. Oh, they're at San Francisco on Sunday, and the Niners are banged up. The Bears might actually win that game.
They could win that game. Yeah.
Yeah.
The post-coach firing is real. There's a boost.
That will be kind of interesting. I'm also thinking like, okay, well, Eberflus isn't in that building anymore, and he was the defensive mind that always would kind of, like you said a lot, would give KOC some problems. Well, now that he's not there anymore, how much of an impact is that going to have on the Bears defense? They still have some pretty good players over there with Sweat and Jalen Johnson and all those guys, but you got to wonder like how his absence as the defensive schemer with Eberflus, what kind of impact that's going to have on that side of the ball. And I think factoring that in, I think the Vikings will be able to move the ball a little bit, do just enough. I could see this being kind of close, just because it's familiarity with the division rival and everything. But I think the Vikings will come out on top and improve to 12-2.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
One of these is not going to work out, so I think you're going to pick the next one to not work out against the Seattle Seahawks, December 22nd. Is that right? Because I mean, 7 wins in a row is kind of crazy. How many games in a row did they win in '98? Like, what was their longest?
7. They started out 7-0, then lost at Tampa, and then won 8 in a row to finish 15-1. And really, it was 9 in a row if you count the playoff game.
But if they get to 12-2 in their 1-score games, we'll still hear that they're not good enough.
Right. Yeah. This is. I could see this being a loss at Seattle. The Seahawks, again, another team kind of like Arizona. You just kind of, we've been saying this for weeks. You don't really know. They're kind of the quintessential 500-ish team that sometimes they look great. Other times they look really just bad. They've actually been a better road team this year than they have been at home, which is kind of hard to believe. They kind of took care of business against the Jets yesterday, which, speaking of dumpster fires, New York Jets. Yeah.
Did you watch the game?
I saw some highlights.
I suggest that you watch the game. It's one of the stupidest games ever played in National Football League history. The Seattle Seahawks gave up a touchdown kick return. They fumbled the kick return. They bungled everything under the earth and still found a way to win. It was ludicrous. Somebody had a tweet with the list of things that happened. I went back and watched some of the extended highlights. It's just a comedy show. I have no idea how the New York Jets lost that football game, other than that their quarterback is just awful now. Weird. Old guys coming back from Achilles. I feel terrible. I'm their age. I feel terrible every day. I'm sure you do too. How do these guys think they're going to come back from an Achilles?
And if Sam Darnold leaves in free agency, and if one person suggests Aaron Rodgers coming here, I'm going to throw up like I've never have before. I want nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that.
No, I think we'll be okay there.
Yeah.
So that makes them 12-3, and then they play the Packers at home. Now, this game, I have circled this game, Manny, because I think this is the one where everybody decides whether they believe the Vikings can win the Super Bowl or not. That's not a rational thing to do, but that is the thing that all the fans will do. What they were doing on Sunday was, I don't know. Yay, I get, it's this team kind of hemming and hawing, not really getting into it until the end of the game when they were about to win. If they're beating the Packers at home, then the belief will be on. The entire state will go crazy. But if they lose, everyone's going to say, same old Vikings. So, what do you think?
I think they're going to win this game.
Really?
I think they're going to win this game. And I think that's going to put them at 13-3. And I think that's going to make Week 18 at Detroit absolutely massive. Because the Lions, a little bit banged up on defense now, kind of survived a close win against the Bears, where the Bears just kind of fumbled that thing away with that little meltdown at the end. The Lions have a little bit of a tough schedule. They gotta play the Buffalo Bills here. They gotta play Green Bay this Thursday, and then they gotta host the Buffalo Bills, who are playing great right now. We might be looking at both of these teams being 13-3-ish at Week 18, and that's where it's going to be for all the marbles for the NFC North, obviously, and maybe even, depending on what Philadelphia does over the next few weeks, for that number 1 seed in that first round bye as well. It's going to be huge. It's going to be massive. For now, I'll call it a Lions win.
Okay.
The Lions take the division. The Vikings finish 13-4.
So you had stuck on 12 wins for a few weeks, and now you up the ante to 13. I think that's fair because you thought they weren't going to beat Arizona. You were almost very right about that. They end up coming away really escaping a game they should have lost against Arizona. and now face an Atlanta team they can beat, a Chicago team they can beat. Seattle's interesting, and the Packers game will be the toughest challenge. Question for you.
Mhm.
Lions and Packers. Would you rather see the Lions win and sort of not entirely concede the division, but say, like, all right, well, or would you rather see the Packers win and keep the gap this close with all three teams? What do you think is better?
I think the Packers winning, I think would make it better,
Mhm.
and I think would help the Vikings because now at that point, the Vikings are really in a position where I don't want to say control their own destiny, but like you win, if you win 2 out of these next 3, Atlanta, Chicago, Seattle, and you're 12 and you're let's say you're 12 and that put them at 12 and 3, right? Yeah, 12 and 3 going into that Green Bay game. Now you've got Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit all really bunched up at the top. And if you're the Vikings at that point, you beat Green Bay and then you beat Detroit in week 18, I would imagine that the division is yours at that point. So I I feel like a Lions win on Thursday kind of brings the Packers back into the conversation of really competing for a wild card because that dropped them to 9-4. And then the Lions are 11-1 and still really in the driver's seat of the division. And now at that point, it's really just the Vikings as the only team that can challenge them. So I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth because a Packers loss would kind of almost eliminate them, or pretty much would eliminate them from winning the division because they'd be 2.5 games back, and the Lions will have swept them, and so it'd be really hard for them to catch Detroit at that point. But Packers win just keeps those 3 teams bunched up together, and now it's just whoever kind of wins all of the games between each other will ultimately win the division. So it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think the right answer is that you want the Packers to win, I think, because you're trying to win the division. You're trying to get the number 1 seed in the conference,
Yeah,
which is still on the table. A few weeks ago, we probably would have maybe said it the other way because you want to keep the Packers behind you. But now that you're at 10-2, your eyes should be on a race between 3 teams, the Eagles, the Lions, and the Vikings, for winning the entire conference. Because if they could find a way to win the conference, then you are talking about a first round bye and then home field for the divisional round. And all you got to do is win one game and you're in the championship. I mean, the NFC championship. I like, holy cow. So you want to chase that with every bit of your soul, which means you really need the Packers to win this game. And you mentioned that the Lions will have to play Buffalo. The Lions don't have anybody on defense left. Their
yeah,
defense is so banged up that if they stumble a little bit here and Houston doesn't give them a game away with the 5 interceptions, but we saw their offense stumble in the second half against Chicago and they should have lost the game. And if that happens against Green Bay, their coach knows how to, you know, call timeout. So I assume that I think Matt LaFleur is a really good coach. So I assume he could call timeout and win the game. But then they go to Buffalo. They got a great coach. They got a great team. They got a better quarterback there than Detroit does. They look like a behemoth. The Bills look like they're favorites for the Super Bowl, I think, hands down. Now with the way that they've played recently, yeah, it's not over. If you win against Atlanta and the Packers win, I mean, you're right there, and it could be collision course for week 18 for that game being who wins the conference, who wins the
yeah.
division, get the home playoff game. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot on the line. Yeah, I know some of you, Taylor says, can't root for the Packers under any condition. How about this condition? This condition makes a lot of sense to root for the Packers, actually.
Yeah.
The condition that your team can chase the championship of the conference is really a condition that you should kind of make an exception.
Yeah, I think the key part of this too, of this whole scenario, is the fact that you have a win over the Packers already. So them sort of being tied with you right now because you have that tiebreaker over them doesn't doesn't hurt you as much. Whereas Detroit has the win over you, so you're kind of wanting other teams. If you want to catch Detroit, you're hoping that other teams can beat them, give them another loss or two, And then, you'll be in a position in week 18 that if you can beat them, you salvage the season split with them. And depending on how those tiebreakers go, it might put you in a position to win the division. You've already got the one up on the Packers to where it doesn't matter that they have the same record as you or if they're only a game behind you at this point, because you're essentially still like 2 games up on them because you have the game in hand on them. And then if you just beat them on December 29th, you will have swept them. And then you've got all the tiebreakers over them. And it doesn't matter if you finish with the same record as them. So because Detroit has that one up on you, you kind of want somebody else to step in and kind of do you a favor by beating them. And in this case, on Thursday, it could be the Packers. We'll see.
All right, we will see. And you and I will be doing a show on Thursday. Last week, I screwed up and previewed our Thursday show, not realizing it was Thanksgiving. Some of us still did a show anyway after Thanksgiving. After what the Bears did, I had to go live. I had to talk about it.
You should have seen me. I'm over at my mom's on Thursday, and we've got the game on. It's my mom and my mom's partner and my brother-in-law, my sister, and my nephews. We're all over there, and I'm like the only one. We're all watching the game, and I'm the only one that's like losing my mind with what the Bears are doing as the clock is ticking down. I'm like, oh my God, what are they doing? They're letting the clock run down. Are you guys watching this? What is going on? What are they doing? Oh my God, I can't believe they did that. And my mom's just kind of looking like, oh, wow. My mom, who's not into football at all, she's just like, oh, wow. Oh, my son is very passionate about this. I don't know why. So it was pretty funny.
I never yell at the TV. Like, I just sit there and watch whatever happens. And sometimes I'll be surprised like everybody else and read what the internet's saying or whatever. I was yelling at the TV. I was yelling, timeout, timeout, timeout. Like, what are you doing? Like, just football. Kind of like, actually, Kevin Seifert will tell you that in the press box yesterday, when Jonathan Gannon did not go for it, I stood up out of my chair and yelled to the other guys on our row. Now, consider it's loud in there. It's not like I was interrupting other reporters. Like, it's just Judd and Alec Lewis and Seifert. But I yelled, I can't believe he didn't go for it. And they were like, why? Just put him up 6. And I'm like, I got to win the game. And then they're like, you're a crazy person. But this is an analytical thing. And Greg Olson, I saw today that he had said it on the broadcast. Like, it influences how your opponent is going to play. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to play for the win. And O'Connell even dropped that in today, saying that, like, yeah, we had to have a 4-down mentality. We had to be more aggressive. And so I guess nothing tweaks out my brain quite like mismanagement of games. And I completely lost it. So then I had to talk about it for an hour after that. But this Thursday night, it will be favorite Falcons, which is a great list to make. So we will have that on Thursday. We will preview the game and react to whatever's going on when we're on to Thursday Night Football. So that'll be a lot of fun. Thanks, Manny, for your time. And I will see you on Thursday. Appreciate you, man.
Sounds good. Football.
All right. Got some time to answer a few more questions. So throw them in the chat. Questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, emotions. Let me scroll back up a little bit here. You guys with your names, I'll just say Blunt here. Had JJ not injured his knee, what are the odds we don't see Darnold this year? Very low. Sam Darnold was having a good training camp. He was on the same page with Justin Jefferson for the whole training camp. You can go watch the old videos where I kept showing up back here going, this might be happening, guys. Like, Sam Darnold might be good. I don't know. That kept happening during training camp, coming home day after day, talking about these good practices that Sam Darnold was having. He did struggle in the joint practices. If JJ McCarthy had dominated them and Darnold had really struggled, then maybe there was a small chance, but I still don't think they could bail on the entire offseason plan of developing JJ McCarthy. And remember, Kevin O'Connell, that was his thing the entire time. He was going to make sure that JJ McCarthy was 100% ready to go before he was going to start him. That would have meant that Sam Darnold would start week 1. And with the way Darnold has played right from week 1, right against the Giants, they fumble on the first drive, which this team just cannot hold on to the football for some reason. And then after that, it's just a blowout. They get down 3-0 and they blow them out. And then Texans and 49ers and whatever order that was in, and the Packers and the Jet, and like they reeled off the wins. And I think also that Darnold played pretty well against Detroit and the Rams. So even when they lost games, they wouldn't have been thinking about benching Darnold. The only time would have been in Jacksonville. And I still don't think that that would have been enough, the way that he played in Jacksonville. I still don't think that that would have been quite enough. They would have given him another week for sure, or another couple weeks. Played great against Tennessee, played great against Chicago. Yesterday, he's clutch. I don't think you would have seen McCarthy, and that would have been fine. I'm sure we would have been having the discussion every time a quarter went by that they didn't score 3 touchdowns. Is it time to play McCarthy? And the fact that that hasn't been a thing may have really helped Sam Darnold, actually, just mentally. Kerpluppy says the alternate universe where we hire Harbaugh and Chicago hires KOC really spooked me. Yeah. And especially if they had handled things differently, or, well, handled things the same from a roster perspective and ended up with Caleb Williams and KOC, that would be a pretty dangerous combination. Though Jim Harbaugh is winning football games, there is that. He's turned around their defense. They play a grinded out style because they don't really have a lot of weapons for Justin Herbert, and he's winning games again. It's the same coaches all the time. That's why, is it worth 3 first-round draft picks? No, because when you have one of the 10 best coaches in the league, well, all these other teams hire the Adam Gases and Matt Rules and Urban Meyers and just screw it up over and over again, I don't think you want to risk ending up in that pool of things. But if they had hired Jim Harbaugh here, I mean, does it go way differently? Maybe. I mean, I don't know if it goes way differently because they won a bunch of games in 2022. They probably still do with Jim Harbaugh because he always seems to find ways to win. And then they presumably would have still had a rebuild plan. But if they weren't on the same page with the plan, then things would have been a lot different. This is why it was so important to have KOC and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah on the same page with the entire plot, because then they could take a step back last year. Blowfish says, I want the Lions to drop off as we can't be the only team in the division without a Super Bowl win. Yeah. I don't know if the Lions are going to drop off. They still have so much there, even though they've got injuries on defense. I think what they've gone from, though, with those injuries is from way, way out in front of everybody to a little more failable. And when you look at how they've played against winning teams this year, they did kind of blow out Seattle, but they've also played a lot of close games, and I mean, or division, with Chicago, division with Minnesota. They have played more close games than it looks like. It's just that they ran the score up on Jacksonville and Tennessee, which I don't know how relevant that is. It's good to blow out bad teams. I said that after the Giants game. It's always good to blow out bad teams. You should be blowing out bad teams. But does it matter as much how you played against the Vikings or how you played against the Jaguars? Like, it probably matters more with the Vikings. So I think that the Lions in their current state with their defense as banged up as it is. Now, if they had a full defense with Aiden Hutchinson, I might feel differently, but I think the gap is closer than it appears when it comes to the point differential. Kanitzo, I think, says, why do you think the national media are calling the Vikings frauds? I feel like this is way different from 2022. I'm not fully aware of whom and which national media is saying what about the Vikings, but I wrote about it today about the 1-score game thing and how every game in the NFL is coming down to 1 score. I've seen different numbers. Maybe it's based on whether it's 8 points or 7 points, 80%, 70%. Somewhere along the line, somebody said that if you win 1-score games, you're lucky. And everyone just took that to be complete fact and truth and never circled back on it. But there's a really good article on 538 from a couple years ago where Josh Hermsmeyer, who's a good analytics writer, he used win probability to look at this in a smarter way. And so just for example, when the Vikings beat the Green Bay Packers, it's a 1-score win. but their win probability never dropped below like 75%. They were ahead the entire game. They dominated the game overall. And even in Chicago, when you get to the final 5 minutes of the game, the Vikings have an 80% chance to win the game. They outplayed them for the entire game. You look at the yardage differential, the time of possession for a lot of games, not yesterday. Yesterday was kind of a fake win. Like they got away with it yesterday. They were outplayed in a lot of ways by the Cardinals. So that one you could say is lucky that the Cardinals didn't go for the touchdown there at the end or didn't finish any of the drives. That is one where I think even O'Connell and the way that he talked about it was, we got a lot to learn from that one. We kind of got away with it, and the Cardinals played really well. But a lot of these other wins, it's a 10-point win. That's not one score over Indianapolis. It's a 10-point win over the Tennessee Titans. Probably could have been more over both of those teams. I really think it's because Detroit has been the darling and because they are so good. When you look at all their numbers, but the Vikings are top 10 in points for and points against. Is it that there's not belief in Sam Darnold and they're still thinking it's just some sort of magic carpet ride and it's going to fall off the edge of a cliff, which there's been opportunities for that to happen and it hasn't? I think actually the national media, the perspective that I've had, and this is only just, flipping around a little bit. I don't have time to sit and watch those shows and take them in and know what everyone's saying. But I've usually just haven't seen any discussion about the Vikings at all. And it feels like no one believed it was going to keep happening. So they didn't pay much attention after week 5. And they said Sam Darnold might be the MVP. Then they lost 2 games and they said, okay, put the Vikings away. Let's focus on the Jets. Let's focus on how bleeped up the Jets are. Oh, Chicago? Let's focus on how messed up Chicago is. That has really been my takeaway from the national media this year, is that they just put the Vikings in a closet. We'll deal with them if we have to in the playoffs. But now we need those teams that are in big markets who are falling apart. And that's their business model, and I respect it. But from this seat, where I cover everything up and down and sideways about the Vikings, I do think that they're being left out of the discussion for a Super Bowl contender, a legitimate contender, when the numbers say that they are. And when you talk about it being 2022, I just don't see what relevancy 2022 has. This whole team has been overhauled since 2022. And in 2022, they were 29th in points against and 31st in yards against. Well, that's not the case now. We've seen that this defense is not perfect, but it's good and it's got a lot of star talent on it. And by the numbers, it's top 10 in points. It's top 10 in net yards per pass attempt against. Like, they're a really complete team this year where they weren't in 2022. And just to even add to that point, they just beat Caleb Williams and Kyler Murray. Who are they beating in 2022? Skylar Thompson and Teddy Bridgewater off the bench, Andy Dalton, Mike White, Mac Jones. They were surviving against bad quarterback. How many quarterbacks from the Vikings 2022 schedule are even still starting in the NFL? I would venture a guess that it's not that many. It's not that many. It's probably half their schedule is not even starting anymore. Justin Fields. They beat Justin Fields twice and barely survived him one of the times. Not even a starting quarterback anymore. That's a lot different from this year. Is Levis the best quarterback in the world? No, but he's a starter there and he's had some games and he played well against the Vikings. Brock Purdy, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love. These are all starting quarterbacks. Really, the only backups, Daniel Jones in week 1 and then Mac Jones. And those are the only bad quarterbacks that they've really played or not starters. At least Levis has made sort of a case for himself at times. But yeah, it's nuanced. Like, that's nuanced. That's what we do here. We dive deep into everything, data and numbers and how they compare and everything else. It's not always how it's done to a broader audience. It's more of, is there a big storyline? And if there isn't one, then are they frauds is the story, I think. 80% of games by 1 score. Yeah, I've seen a couple different numbers, but either way, it's like all-time high with 1 score. So that's why what I wrote today was we have to be better at how we look at one-score games. Because if they're all going to come down to one score, how do we evaluate what happened on the field? It's by who played better that day. The Arizona Cardinals had a 92% chance to win with 5 minutes left in the game on Sunday. They played better. They should have won the game. The Vikings squeaked it out. That's something you can't rely on. They have to play better against Atlanta. They have to play better against Chicago. They have to play better against Seattle. If they play like they did yesterday and say, Sam, bring us back from down 13 points at the end of the game, it's not going to work. That I understand. But it hasn't been a season of that. It's actually been a season of, hey, you're up by 11 points. The game is over. Victory format. What the heck is a watermelon kick? Or they fumbled again? Like it's really been that kind of thing of a season rather than, oh, it's a bunch of luck. I think the luck has gone against them as much as it's gone for them this year. There are stats for that, but we have to evaluate on who played better. How many times have the Vikings been the better team on the football field this year out of 12 games? Not the 2 that they lost, not against Arizona. Is there any other game? Is there any other game where they got outplayed this year except for yesterday and the 2 games that they lost? I don't think so. So I would look at it like that. And in 2022, their expected win-loss, which is based on point differential, was 8 wins, and they had 13. This year, it's already 8 wins, and they have 10. So there you go. Brett says, if the Lions continue to play man with their front 7 out, they can't get pressure. KOC will pick them apart. Totally agree. That's what happened against Chicago in that second half. They had to play man, and they were running people across the field, left and right on those mesh routes and the slants and things like that. They were just getting people wide open all over the place. And the Vikings have mostly had a ton of success against Detroit's defense since KOC took over. There isn't really a game that I could think of where they have stopped the Vikings offense. So you go into Detroit potentially week 18 if there's a chance to win the division. It's a little ways down the road, but you don't ever play Detroit thinking there's no chance for the Vikings. Because no matter how good each team has been, when Detroit had no wins and were 0-11-1, they beat the Vikings. Division games are like that. Brett says, what would you say the main difference between this team and 2022 is? Point differential. No, it's defense. They have one. They have one of the best defensive minds in the NFL in Brian Flores versus Ed Donatel, who was playing a system that did not work at all for that unit. And it's weak links. They had so many weak links of that defense. The linebackers were slow. The nickel cornerback couldn't cover anybody. They had to rely on interceptions to stay alive. The D-line was good. The D-line was good that year, but that was pretty much it. I mean, they were just weak everywhere in 2022. Safeties were good as usual, but Josh Metellus was sitting on the bench in 2022 and playing only special teams. That's the biggest difference. The offense is a little bit better this year, actually, than they were in 2022. I think they were 10th, and it's a shade better right now. Sam Darnold has played better quarterback. Go look at the numbers. Compare Kirk to Sam Darnold through this point in 2022. Darnold has been a better quarterback than Cousins was to this point. So the quarterback play has been a little better. The running game has probably been a shade better than it was. They're deeper at wide receiver. Adam Thielen was not the same version as a few years prior, was playing banged up. They didn't get TJ Hawkinson until midway through the season, kind of same deal here, but they've got Hawkinson fully into the offense, and Jordan Addison is just making plays. The offensive line is better, for sure. Dalton Reisner, 0 pressures allowed, 88 PFF grade blocking the pass blocking yesterday. We've never seen that grade from Ed Ingram in a game. Like their offensive line can pass block. They screwed up some stuff yesterday with the blitzes, which is partly the quarterback. It's hard to handle those sometimes when the other defensive coordinator is good. But the offensive line is good this year at pass protection. Not on the run necessarily now, but Cam Robinson has been fine, if not good. He was yesterday. I think he allowed 1 pressure. And Reisner is a game changer for them in pass pro. because now you don't have those quick losses. Ingram was a rookie and Kirk was just getting smashed all over the place. It's a much better team. If they played 2022 Vikings versus 2024 Vikings, I think that the 2024 team is favored by like 3.5 points, if not more. They're just a much better team. Brett, who would your Pro Bowl selections be for the Vikings this year? I'd have to look at kind of everybody to figure that out, but the obvious would be Jefferson, Jonathan Grenard, Blake Cashman, probably the ones I would go to first, and Brian O'Neill, who has had an unbelievable season. And Sam Darnold's got to be in the mix. NFC quarterbacks, Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, Jalen Hurts, probably the top 3 there, unless I'm forgetting someone. So, I mean, the Pro Bowl, what is it anymore? Wally says the Lions game was very tight from a box score perspective. I do think the Lions outplayed them, but it wasn't a massive difference. Yeah, I agree. They did have to get a defensive score there to go ahead, but they didn't outplay them. The Vikings started that game hot, and then the Lions got their running game going and got Jahmyr Gibbs going with some big plays. It was a great game. I mean, that Vikings-Lions, like, give me that 100 times in a row. That was a great football game. Star players, great coaching, left and right, big moments. It was an awesome game. Vikings just came out 2 points short. But if that's what you get for divisional round, if that's what you get for week 18 for the conference, it would be phenomenal. Man Juice, is it time to talk about Aaron Jones? Well, I don't really know what to say about it, because when we talk about things that are random, fumbles are pretty random. The other thing is, too, that when you look around the league, they are teaching dudes to just punch the crap out of running backs. And I don't know how this is never a personal foul. If you miss the football, don't you just punch the other player? Is that legal? But that's what they're teaching. The peanut punch the pocket, whatever. And he's been kind of the victim of that a couple of times where they just landed the punch. That's what happened the other day. But he's never fumbled this much before in his career, which you could look at as that's why it's a concern. Or you could look at it, it's just been a little bit of a bad run and the ball's popped out a few times and it's nothing to worry about. You could be concerned about the rib injury, if that is playing a role in how tight he can hold the football. I don't know. He just had a really great game against Chicago. And he did fumble in that game as well. And they don't run block the same without Christian Darrisaw. That's obvious. They're going to have to improve the screen game, which has still not been very good. They need an explosive run here or there. The reality is the rest of the season is about that quarterback. It's going to be much like it was on Kirk. It's going to be on the quarterback to move the football. They're not going to be able to just stay on the run game. Cam Akers, though, gave him an explosive. It's going to have to be the occasional run that plays off of the pass and not what it was early in the season where it was the pass playing off the run. That's just where they're at as a team right now. But the fact that they can pass protect gives them a better chance. The right guard. How about this, guys? How many times have you been sitting there watching the game the last 3 weeks and just gone, oh my gosh, the right guard missed his guy entirely and there's a sack? I mean, okay, it was the left side, but there's a couple free runners with the blitzes, but just getting beat off the line of scrimmage, it doesn't happen to Dalton Reisner, and that's been a big improvement. And even when he gets beat, he kind of gets pushed back or finds a way to hold on. So they got better pass protection than they had. They're going to have to find a way to just work the run game as much as they can, but it's not going to be easy because, with Jones, he's not Superman. I mean, he can still get them 4.5 yards to carry, but yeah, I mean, there's a concern there about whether they can have any sort of consistent run game. Canizzo, I think the big thing for the 2022 season, when we lost, we were getting blown out, hence the fraud allegations. And this year's losses are by 1 score. Should have been by 1 score, technically 2 scores, face mask on the Rams that was not called. Should have been called and given Sam Darnold the chance. Now, after seeing him in these clutch situations, don't you really want to go back and see him maybe down 8, get a shot? No, couldn't call the face mask. even though his whole head spun around like Beetlejuice. I don't know. The referee's only standing right there behind him. How would we ever expect him to see that happen? But to your point, yes, the losses have been fairly well played games by the Vikings. They're down by 8 points before the safety at the end. I mean, the other one's by 2 points. You lose your 2 games by 12. And Kevin O'Connell made this point. Yeah, if you win by 1 score and your losses aren't blowouts, you still end up with a pretty good point differential. And that is true. And they have a good point differential. They're in the, still top 5 in the league in point differential. So I don't know. I think that when you don't have Mahomes or Allen or somebody who's been there, they're always going to say, even Jared Goff has been there. They're always going to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they can really do it. They got Darnold. I don't know if they can really do it. It's always going to be the discussion, which is fair. I mean, because he hasn't done it yet. Tony says no one is talking about how Darnold gets hot and takes them in the playoffs. He has only played 12 games in the system. Yeah, I mean, he's fully entrenched now in the system, but he's playing these last 3 weeks. I mean, the first half was rough, but aside from that, I think about how good he has played just over these last 3 weeks. I mean, it's been phenomenal. He's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league over these last 3 weeks. Does that continue? They're playing a pretty bad defense here. They go to Chicago, not to Chicago. They'll play Chicago. Seattle doesn't have a great defense. Yeah, I mean, there is a chance that he could finish this strong. AV, are you concerned that the defense may be gassed after yesterday's game? Very much. Very much. And if Stephon Gilmore can't play, this is the thing. When you see what Atlanta just did, your initial reaction is to go, Vikings are going to beat them by 30, which is true if they play like that. But he threw 4 picks and they only lost by a couple points. The Vikings defense having to stop Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier the entire game with that offensive line could be a problem. It might not have to be a lot that Kirk Cousins does. Get a few passes into the hands of his playmakers and they can control the ball. You know that's what they're going to do. They are going to try to control the ball for that entire game on the ground and with short passes. This might be one where Andrew Van Ginkel is hunting a pick 6 or something. If he does that, somebody clip that and tweet it out. But it's not an easy game. And when you come off playing 80 snaps, you always worry about the defense being gassed. They've had to chase around 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league at scrambling. Mustin Sir says Dallas Turner played a couple of snaps, did practically nothing. Still early, but Kwesi's drafting. I just like the Kwesi drafting conversation. Just throw it out. Just throw it out. They don't even have any picks next year. I'm not worried about that. I'm really not. I'm not worried about Dallas Turner. You're just going to have to give him time. You guys don't like to do that. With draft picks, you like the answers right away. He's getting in the game. We'll see what he becomes when the opportunities start to grow. He's a rookie. I don't know. I'm not concerned about, they're 10-2. I'm not concerned about Kwesi's drafting. Taylor, any news on Gilmore? Yes. Kevin O'Connell said he does not believe it to be a serious injury, but he's not sure about him playing this week. And certainly Fabian Moreau was in over his head a little bit. The pass interference was suspect, and he did have some good coverage later in the game. Fabian Moreau has played a lot of football in his years. He's played a lot of football. He was a pretty much average corner everywhere he's gone, and he's a guy that can fill in for a week or two. This is a hard week to do it. They have receivers. They have guys who get open one-on-one, but you would rather they take the risk of playing Fabian Moreau and not play Gilmore and make sure that his hamstring is 100% when they go down the stretch. Kufu 21. Sam may not have Kirk's accuracy, but he's willing to try tight windows, and I do feel Sam has a better deep ball. Yeah, Kirk has had, so there's kind of different versions of Kirk. I mean, the 2019 version where he's still in his prime and throwing the football well, his deep ball was really great that year. And in 2022, maybe it wasn't on the same levels, more intermediate passing. Sam Darnold has been incredibly accurate this year. I don't think that he's sprayed the football all over the place. When guys are open, he makes plays. But yeah, I mean, Kirk, it was more of an intermediate accuracy where actually Darnold's been good the last couple weeks. But for Kirk, it was slant, quick out, things like that, comeback route. He could throw the comeback route with really great anticipation. The slot fade where he's dropping it in the bucket, throwing it up, letting his guy run underneath it. He's a very accurate quarterback. So they're different, but Darnold is much more physically gifted. Just throws the ball much harder and is able to find spots in those tight windows that Kirk just would not throw the ball. And I think that some of the offense was predicated around throwing into those tight windows because it was built for Sam Darnold. And I'm sorry, built for Matt Stafford. And Sam Darnold is playing like Matt Stafford in 2021. He's playing a very similar, like on paper type of season. So I think it was kind of a little bit square peg round hole for Kirk to say, hey, you got to let this one rip into that tight window. And that's just not really what he wanted to do. And there was a lot of shorter passes because of that. Those were his choices, going to those shorter passes because he didn't want to let it go. And we've seen Darnold really let it go. Wally says Shaq Griffin played well yesterday. They played fine against the pass, 5.8 yards per attempt. Yeah, the yards per attempt thing was hurt a little bit by some failures in the red zone, interceptions. They did not get roasted, but the problem was it was a short passing game on purpose. They averaged 5.8 yards per attempt kind of on purpose to stay on the field all day, and that certainly wore down the Vikings defense. If Atlanta does that, they can run really well, and they will be able to grind out the clock. That's the concern there. Jacoby, thank you so much for the super chat. Jacoby, really appreciate you, man. Was at my first ever Vikings game after being a fan for roughly 10 years this Sunday, and it was amazing. I can barely talk now. There you go. I mean, the end of that game was you got the full experience of going to a Vikings game where at the end of the game, I mean, you're gripping the edge of the chair, you're sweating, you don't know what's going to happen. It's fourth down. That place when it's like that is really something. I mean, when the Vikings are driving, the crowd is trying to stay quiet, as I'm sure you noticed, but they want to explode. They want to go crazy with some sort of big play, and they were able to do that a few times. It's the best atmosphere in the sport a lot of times. Yesterday, I thought that there wasn't much juice until later in the game, and I know that is because of the way that they played. There are times where if I were to make a suggestion to the crowd, don't get too caught up in the offense not scoring to forget to cheer when the other team's offense is out there. There were a few times that I thought Kyler Murray had it a little too easy because the fans were frustrated with the offense. Like, hey, they're do your thing. Do what you're supposed to do. Get them to jump offside. Brett says, I'm viewing Turner as the ultimate gadget guy. Will take him a year or two to get right where Flo wants him to be. If they wanted a true edge, they would have gotten Leatu Latu, but they have Grenard and Van Ginkel. What it seems like to me is the plan with Dallas Turner is to make him into an Andrew Van Ginkel type player, to rush him wide, to have him drop back in coverage, to teach him every part of the game. He has to get stronger. He's got to grow. He was one of the youngest players in the draft. There's a lot to learn in this defense. I just have more patience than everybody else who is in love with the draft, because this is how it goes for some guys. Jared Verse is 24. He's a grown man coming out of college, and he's played like one. He's played great. But as far as Dallas Turner, he has to develop. And they're developing him clearly on a plan to be ready to take over when Van Ginkel goes, or to mix him into this scheme with a specific role for next year. But it's going to take time, and that's Brian Flores. Look at this defense. It's built with all these veteran players because he's not a draft Nick. He's not obsessed with the draft. He's obsessed with, let me develop this player to be the next Dante Hightower, which he's compared him to, or the next Van Ginkel, where he is just this multifaceted outside linebacker who's everywhere, rather than hey, let me just rush him off the edge because I'm supposed to, because we drafted him high. I'm sure the front office probably does have a little impatience with him. But he was on the field yesterday. He made a few plays. He's not just edge rushing. He's dropping back in coverage quite a bit. And maybe that's a criticism. I don't know. Maybe you could say, hey, Brian Flores, how about you just rush this guy all the time? But I think he's got a bigger goal for him in mind. But I'm just not. One is look at the discussion we're having tonight about the quarterback situation, how they've built this team, where they stand, sitting here at 10-2. I'm just not into focusing on, draft picks from years before or something like that. It's what every team has, good and bad drafts. It's how you deal with it. And then with Dallas Turner, they gave up a lot for him. I agree. The standard should be high, but I'm not declaring players at this point in the game. I'm just not. Like, he's gotten on the field. He hasn't made a lot of splash plays. He also hasn't looked totally out of place to me when I watch him back on tape. He's had some good games where he's made plays, and we'll see how he develops from here. He's going to need a lot more opportunity. Taylor says, sticking with the Thanksgiving theme of being thankful for this team, quarterback, coaches this season. It's been incredibly fun and big hopes for and dreams for the future. Yeah, think about just where they were not too long ago. They were in a place that felt hopeless. It felt like there was no answer. They were lost out there in mediocrity, just in the desert. How do they get out of this? The cap was screwed. You have Cousins under a big contract. There's no way out. The culture was screwed up in 2021. And in a couple of years, now the debate is, well, what do you do with Sam Darnold when he plays like a top 10 quarterback when you got this other top 10 draft pick and you're 10-2, but your GM messed up one draft? What do we do now? Like, Kwesi called what do you call them? Champagne problems, and everyone made fun of him for it. But I mean, in a lot of ways, that's what it is. Well, they've won too many one-score games. Darn. That's like the biggest problem. This KOC keeps winning all his one-score games. Darn. Like, that's the biggest problem that you have. It has really changed around. And I still think that it's like a hard adjustment to not just look around and want to point out everything that's wrong, because that's what we did for so long. And that was the right for so long. And that was the right thing to do. The right thing to do in the Spielman and Zimmer era was to look around and go, look at all this. What are they going to do with this? And then even in 2022, when they get to the end of the season and they don't win, it was still the right thing to do to say, well, what are you going to do with all this? You have Kirk on this short extension you gave him. Are you going to sign him? What are you going to do? How are you going to get out of this? And then we thought, all right, well, it's going to take a couple years to get out of it. Turns out it didn't. I would not have expected it, but that's a pretty good place to be. It's a pretty good place to be when you're the team that everyone's saying, is this really for real that they're 10-2? There's a lot worse places to be than that. Wade says a 21-year-old will never get snaps on an 8-2, 10-2 team behind Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard. Zero concerns. He'll be a beast. Yeah, I'm just giving it time. Just giving it time. They have two of the best players in the league at their position. With Patrick Jones, I think that there could be more mixing in of Dallas Turner. We did see that yesterday. Jones got banged up a little bit and Turner was in more. And I expect that we'll just continue to see just a rotation as they are out on the field so much. They're going to need to rotate, and they did that a lot. So Turner will play, and he got in the face of Kyler Murray one time, had to throw the ball away. A lot of his plays were dropbacks into coverage, and you don't notice him, but if he's in the right spot, I'll take a closer look at it on tape. I usually look at the tape on Tuesday. David says, I think that McGlothern will get some valuable experience over the next couple weeks, and there are quite a few more young players that are already included and will be infused as well. Jalen Redmond has done a really good job for sure. He's somebody that they kind of just found. They're better at just finding random guys, it seems like. Like Ivan Pace and Dwight McGlothern might get into a game. They're going to go with the veterans, though. They're always going to go with the veterans. I don't know, even if Gilmore's banged up, if McGlothern's going to play. Maybe he will. He was someone they were very high on in training camp. But it's just, Brian Flores should go with the veterans. They're 10-2. They should go with the veterans. They're a really good team that's competing. Like, that's what you do. You don't throw out rookies and try to develop them and get them the highest snap count you could get them. You try to win every game. Wade, remember 6 months ago when everyone was confident Darnold would consistently grade higher than Cousins at 25% the price? Me neither. Such an awesome ride to be on. I'm not shocked, though. I mean, I'm surprised, but I'm not shocked. I was, how many times over the years did people say, well, who's going to play quarterback? If you don't have Cousins, who's it going to be? And my answer was, let's find out. I remember in 2022, I said, and people were displeased, that if they had just signed Marcus Mariota and let Kirk walk, they probably win like 10 games. And the reaction was like, no way, Marcus Mariota is horrible. But the reaction when they signed Sam Darnold was that he was horrible. I wanted to find out. Let's see. And Nick Mullins was the real test case. I think that, I don't know, they always wanted to do this. I get the sense that they always wanted to move on from Kirk in that draft for those quarterbacks. But if there was something that pushed them over the edge, it had to be those Mullins games. They should have beat Cincinnati. They should have beat Detroit the first time. He played well enough to win those games. And his talent level compared to Sam Darnold is just nowhere close. Nick Mullins would even say that. And to be able to have an offense that could still put up yards like that and be one good throw away from beating Detroit at home with Nick Mullins, I think that said how strong the infrastructure really was. And I'm definitely not shocked that a guy who's 36 years old is struggling to recover from an Achilles injury. That is not surprising at all. That was always the biggest fear for me. If you bring him back and the Achilles doesn't heal right, or he runs out of gas, what do you do? And their answer might end up to Penix. New Daddy-O, would you say that Darnold is essentially a one-read quarterback? I would not say that. No, I would not. There's been plenty of times this year where he's dropped back in the pocket, gone through his reads, and let it rip. It's not always the first read. I think that if you give him the right opportunities where there's space, that he can throw into that space with more anticipation than I thought. Like early in the season, I kind of thought he was lacking in anticipation throws, but those have really jumped up a lot. But he's read the defense fine this year. I mean, this last week, the sacks were him hanging on the ball a little too long, and they weren't getting it blocked up right. Probably some of that is him as well. He's always going to try to hang in and get to another read. In fact, I would say that one of his big issues is probably that he's always trying to hang in and see if something flashes open to make that throw. And where he's been a little better in his best moments is trying to throw the ball away. Or even sometimes if you take a sack, then that's okay. Take a sack. Like that's all right. And they've overcome that. It's been fine. But he's been better at not making mistakes after he gets to his first read and just, throwing it out of bounds or something like that. But as far as being a one read quarterback, no, I don't think that's really true. I think him and Kevin O'Connell are very much on the same page with this offense. It's just that what O'Connell needs to do, in my humble opinion, my non-former NFL quarterback observer opinion, is the second half gets going when some of the short stuff gets going. You get a 6-yard screen to Justin Jefferson. Great. It's a positive play. 2nd and 4. Off you go. Hawkinson underneath. Don't forget about him. Kind of forgot about him a little bit yesterday. Addison is so good on quick stuff. Get the ball out of his hands. Get the thing moving. Hunting big plays early, I get it. But sometimes hunting completions early. Hunting getting the ball out early. Get a running back screen that works sometime. That would be my suggestion for the offense. Jason, what's the book behind you in the frame? This here little number you're referring to? That would be my book. Football is a numbers game. Spent a year and a half reporting on Pro Football Focus, analytics movement, its impact on the NFL, which would shock you how much it actually is, since everybody on the internet says no one cares about the grades. Well, I interviewed Kwesi adofo-mensah for it, who said that one of the ways he got ahead in the NFL was by using the grades. So I guess sometimes people do use the grades. But that and much more for the reader in your life for the holiday season. Football is a numbers game, wherever you get your books. Thank you for, did you do that on purpose, Jason? Did you do that just for me so I could pump my book? I appreciate that. Thank you. Alex says, remember when you couldn't believe the Packers moved on from Jones for Jacobs? I guess. I appreciate you listening long enough to remember that. If you've got a dossier of the rest of all of my opinions from March, then that'd be fine. What's the comparison? Like, how's Aaron Jones doing? I mean, Jones fumbled the football twice in this last game, but how's he really doing? 820 yards, 4.5 yards a carry, right? This year, it's pretty good. How's Josh Jacobs doing? Josh Jacobs has 987 yards of 4.5 yards per carry. Seems to me that they worked out for both of them. One thing that I would maybe bring up with that is we have to really strongly consider more the environment for running back. I mean, environment for everybody, right? But the coach, Matt LaFleur, knows how to run the dang football. And I think what they were probably concerned about was Jones's health. That makes a lot of sense. If Aaron Jones is playing for Green Bay with their running team, with their scheme, with their offensive line, does he have the same numbers? Probably pretty close. It did surprise me that they did that because Aaron Jones, remember him in the playoffs last year? He was incredible. And Josh Jacobs had not been very good last year. So yeah, that did surprise me. I think it's worked out really good for both teams. I mean, Aaron Jones has been phenomenal. He has been an incredible signing for the Vikings. He just had the ball pop out a couple times the last few weeks. They need him down the stretch as a receiver to catch the ball. They need him in the run game to make some special stuff happen. They're going to need him to be good the rest of the way. But he's brought the best running back play since what, 2020 to this team? Tony says, seems like O'Connell and Phillips are slow to figure out what works each game. See, a lot of times what happens is we see a game and then we just say that that's everything. Remember a couple weeks ago where people were asking me, is it only KOC's opening script that works and not the other? And then yet the opening script doesn't work. So does he not know how to adjust? It's a game by game type of thing. I looked this up for Kevin O'Connell because I got this question on the Friday mailbag on the written side a couple weeks ago. And I looked this up and I looked at quarter by quarter where the Vikings rank, touchdowns, points scored, yards per play, all that stuff. It doesn't really change for his career over like how effective they are from quarter to quarter. It's kind of like saying, hey, this team scores a lot of their runs in baseball in the first 3 innings, so they must be a first inning team. And then by the end of the season, they're distributed. They were slow to figure out what worked against the Arizona Cardinals. I also think that the Aaron Jones fumble really shocked everybody, and you felt some wind come out of the sails there. It just didn't seem right after that. Like something was wrong after the Aaron Jones fumble. I think it really shook everybody. But in the previous game against the Bears, they fly down the field and Jones fumbles at the goal line, but they should have scored a touchdown there. There's been plenty of games where they jump out to a fast start. There's been some games where they don't and then figure it out a little later. I've never really figured out a rhyme or reason on a game-to-game basis with this. I just think that they're always hunting big plays and that sometimes they need to identify like, okay, that's not there. Let's get it to Hockenson. Hockenson should be a run play at this point. A 7-yard pass to TJ Hockenson is a run play. You're going to complete 90% of them. He's always there. He always catches it. He's going to fall forward. He's going to break a tackle sometimes. Like that's something that they need to establish super early on is we're going to go underneath to TJ Hockenson until you make us not. I shot you 99. Is Will Reichard returning for the Falcons game, or is this team going to let Romo continue kicking? Well, they're not going to let him. It's really the health of Will Reichard that has to do with that. I don't know. They opened his window today, but I don't know if he's going to practice. I'll find that out tomorrow. I don't know when he's going to come back. Usually they try to open the window with enough time for the player to get whatever he needs to be at 100%. I don't want to rush Will Reichard back. That's for sure. You do not want to be in a playoff game and all of a sudden he's having problems or something, right? So, anyway, okay. Well, great chat, my friends. It should be an exciting week of discussion. I was just talking with Mike Renner, CBS Sports, formerly PFF, and he's going to come on the show for this week. Maybe we'll get a Falcons guest to talk about Kirk. I haven't booked anybody yet. We'll see. But the usual suspects, Jeremiah Searles, to break down everything that he saw from the game and going forward. And Manny Hill on Thursday. Andrew Kramer, Star Tribune. There's a lot. There's a lot coming. I'm very excited about it. And our Wednesday night chat will also happen on Wednesday. It'll be just like this. So make sure that you pop in for that. And everybody, if you're new, subscribe, tell your friends, and sign up for the newsletter over at purpleinsider.football. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching. As always, again, really fun chat. I think it should be an exciting week leading up to this game. Can't wait. And we'll talk to you guys later. Football